Hello, and welcome to the Comic Literate podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, and penny dreadfuls. I'm your host, the soon-to-be known as Comic Stan, and with me as always is my idealistic co-host, it's Jamie.
Idealistic?
Would you say you're not?
No, I'm the most jaded, pessimistic motherfucker going.
Idealistic about like things in your own life, maybe.
I refer us back to the conversation we had about AI, where I was just like, the world's going to end, Ryan.
I say for the listeners, it's the one conversation about AI we've had on the podcast, maybe two. Between us, it's the 100th conversation about AI.
Yeah, like every time something happens, I'm like, look, Ryan, the apocalypse is coming.
And I don't know if I've mentioned this in person, like, you know, off air or not, but for someone who I don't think could be replaced by AI, you're more scared of it than people I know who easily could be replaced by it.
Yeah, no, I'm fairly human and I do fairly human work.
You human work with other humans. So until they actually get the full Westworld, like put a robot that looks like a person thing. And even then, they're still going to have that uncanny valley of like, they pause and stare at you for a second too long. Like I did at the intro after I said hello.
Oh yeah, every time.
But they're going to do that in between sentences. Something's off.
I'm still getting used to the new slowed down Ryan for the intro.
It's a little more slowed down, isn't it? Yeah. I did experiment with like speeding up the entire podcast for one point.
I fucking hated it.
Yeah.
So for reference, every week Ryan does an edit and he sends me an unlisted version of it that I can then have a little listen through and just see if I have any notes. And I'd listened to 25 seconds of it and I messaged Ryan saying, did you speed this fucking thing up? And he was like, yeah, by 0.1. I wanted to see if you noticed. And I was like, I did notice instantly and I hate it.
I think for me it's, I edit in 1.5.
Yeah, of course you do.
And when I then listen to a normal speed, because I feel myself getting used to 1.5. So when I first started, it's like, hello, welcome back to the Comic Literate podcast. And then when I then go back to it, then your brain makes it go normal.
Yeah.
There's a thing where when you wear glasses that turn everything upside down, your brain gets used to it
and then
suddenly
it flips everything.
And then if you suddenly take off the glasses, your normal sight is upside down. I think my brain does that with the 1.5 speed. And then when I then turn it off for the final product, I then listen to that normal speed. I go, God, we're slow.
You're a broken human being.
Well, I'm like, I'm like the Flash, who's like, everyone's moving too slowly around me.
Don't, because that's next time, and I don't want to.
Little hint for next week.
So what are we talking about this week, Ryan?
So this week, this is definitely getting into the give Jamie the good titles to do up until the mandatory superhero
This was
talk.
A little treat for me, wasn't it?
Yes, and we'll get into a little bit I liked in it. But basically, we are doing the Image limited series 8 Billion Genies, which was a top seller of trade paperbacks. So I thought a great one to dive into. So it was very popular, and you'll hear just what we thought about it when we get into it.
Coming up later.
In 5 minutes.
After this break.
God, imagine if we had advertisers.
No.
Well, one day. I'll just advertise things in the room. I'm just like, this show is brought to you by the candle in the corner there that I think might be vanilla or something.
Yeah, it's French vanilla, baby.
I got that from the color. I'm some kind of savant candle identifier.
There's also one in a Brewdog bottle that's quite cool.
Does it smell of Brewdog?
No.
Do you want
stale IPA and fucking regret?
Do you want your flat to smell of beer? I could do that without the candle if I put my mind to it. So, 8 Billion Genies, limited release from Image Comics, which I will bring up I had to go to the Image website because this is one of those newish ones that wasn't on Wikipedia yet. But, maybe it will be soon. Maybe someone will make an edit for it, and maybe they'll credit us, and that's how we get known.
We've said this.
By being credited for Wikipedia entries.
Wikipedia influencers.
That's the foolproof plan to becoming the next Joe Rogan podcast.
It's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Exactly. So 8 Billion Genies, written by Charles Soule, or Soule. I'm not sure 100% on the pronunciation.
I'm not going to dive in on that one.
And art by Ryan Browne. Both names that I've never heard before, or at least not known well enough. And the premise of which, do you want me to read the proper blurb, or?
Go on, do the blurb.
Do I read the blurb, or do you try and recommend us the story?
No, read the blurb. I'm not feeling it today. I'm not ready for it.
I'll give you one pass, but you definitely have to do it on the Flash next week.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Exactly.
Yeah, fine.
Eat your vegetables, and then this is passing your vegetables this week, but you have to eat them next week.
I'm getting dessert for dinner today. Next week I eat my... Yeah, okay.
Because I'm a bad parent.
I'll eat my fucking broccoli.
But it's fun. It's cereal for dinner tonight. That's what we're doing.
Do you know what?
I'm divorced dad who's trying to make it seem fun while you're around his house.
Whenever I'm ill, that's all I can face. And so, like, I will be like riddled. I had fucking COVID, like, really badly, and the only thing I could face was chocolate Wheaties, chocolate Shreddies. And so for like 2 days, I subsisted entirely off cocoa Shreddies and oat milk. It was fucking awful.
Hot take, which I don't know if it's going to be too hot for the mics here, but cereal tastes better in the evening. It's weird, isn't it? You know what it is? And I could do a whole thing about intermittent fasting, but eating in the morning, it's just not right. It doesn't feel right.
I'm going to be honest with you. I always have cereal in the house. It's very rare I eat cereal for breakfast. Cereal is dessert.
Chocolate cereal is a dessert that should not be anything but a dessert.
Yeah.
And yet they market it as like, is your child not paying attention to school? Feed them chocolate in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I ate that shit growing up every fucking morning.
I thought you were about to do it. And look at me, I turned out fine. I'm like, oh, don't know about
20 stone with chest pains. Like,
call the ambulance. Right, so that's one tangent down, 10 more to go. The blurb of what we're reading is
do it.
8 billion genies. If you had one wish, what would you wish for? Now, what if everyone else had what? Do you want me to do in a voice?
Just because I didn't have to eat my vegetables this week.
Right.
Surely when you do the blurb, it's Alan Moore. Like, I want Alan Moore. I'm sorry, I just want Alan Moore.
I need to watch more Alan Moore, like, interviews.
It's funnier that your Alan Moore isn't anywhere near Alan Moore.
Like your Will Smith from Suicide Squad. It makes me think that you saw like the XXX parody of Suicide Squad and it was some guy with no teeth was playing Will Smith.
I've not seen Suicide Squad.
Okay. You just saw the trailer.
I don't even know that I've seen the trailer. I know that line. I know that one line from the film. I know nothing else about it.
Okay. Well, you're spot on. It's exactly how he sounds. It's exactly how he sounds in the film.
Don't spoil it for me.
All right. So here's Alan Moore. Maybe it'll help with this talking about like magic and he is a wizard. So maybe that crossover that transference of skills might help.
I love that in the way we talk about Alan Moore, you've gone from old curmudgeon who thinks he's a wizard to he's a wizard.
Yeah, he basically is a wizard. I mean, who are we to tell him he isn't? Like,
fucking A.
What authority do we have to say no?
Who is anybody to tell Alan Moore anything?
Yeah. Have you written Killing Joke?
Exactly. Fucking as if you wrote Killing Joke.
The only people who could criticize Alan Moore are Brian K. Vaughan, Robert Kirkman, technically Brian Michael Bendis, I guess.
No, I don't even think it's other comic book writers. I think there are 3 men who could say something to Alan Moore and 2 of them are dead.
Right.
Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, I was going to guess that one.
And the bloke who wrote Lord of the Rings. Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yes.
They're the only people who can say shit to Moore.
And you know what? I actually, little spoiler for later, I might start to include Charles Soule into that conversation.
Well, fucking A.
We'll get into that. So.
Go on, give us your best Alan Moore. Sorry, I'm not going to interrupt anymore. I'm being quiet.
8 billion genies. If you had one wish, what would you wish for? Now, what if everyone else had one wish too? That's 8 billion genies, the new 8-issue series from Charles Soule and Brian Browne. At exactly the same moment, everyone on Earth gets a genie and one wish. All hell breaks loose. In a very entertaining way, and that's just the beginning. Buckle in for the wildest ride of the year. I gave up towards the end.
Ryan, that was beautiful.
I know.
Everything I wanted it to be.
Fantastic. As long as you're pleased, like the millions of listeners we have, I don't care what they think, just
chuffed.
You. Exactly. But that is the basic premise. It's a world in which I think starting from the premise alone, that is literally almost like just the first issue is the premise, and then your ball rolling, it's beyond the premise after that, if that makes sense.
Well, are we going to just jump in?
would like to propose
Yep.
that we do a somewhat chronological, because it's only 8 issues.
See, now you asked me this before we started recording,
Yeah.
and what you've done now is you've asked me live so that I have to either say yes or no to it.
Well, I think it
No,
actually...
I agree with you. I think it is best dealt with semi-chronologically.
I'll put it this way. If we do just a little bit of a talking about the comic in general without the specific spoilers, then when we do the chronological one, if you do want to refer back and forth, then that will be in the post watershed spoiler zone.
Should we cut this out and then we just start?
Nah. I've never cut anything out of this podcast
except for anything that I say.
Except for 90% of your stuff, obviously.
Yeah, we're actually here for 6 hours, and most of it is me talking.
Yeah, but who's the star though? You know, so
obviously Alan Moore.
I mean, he's the spiritual star of the show. We might as well just call it the Alan Moore podcast, and we just review Alan Moore all the time.
But not his work.
No,
just him.
What he says in interviews. I wasn't too fond of that bit when he called superhero fans man children. Like, I took that personally, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Did he say that?
He did, but so there's a thing. All right, not to go too much tangent. There's a thing that he constantly says shit to try and almost to deter people from buying his stuff.
Because the problem is, if enough of them read it, they're going to make an adaptation.
No, even more insidious. He doesn't get anything from them now.
So he's just like, fuck it.
So imagine if someone stole your work and they were making money for every time they bought it. So say you wrote a book, right?
Yeah.
And then only they got money for it if it's ever bought.
Yeah,
or
I
whatever.
get it.
You could, if you were as petty as some might describe it, you would then say, don't buy that book, it's shit.
Buy my new one instead.
Yeah, also, yeah, exactly. Something like that. So I think that's why he does it. But he goes kind of more of a roundabout way. So rather than criticizing his own work, he calls adults who like superheroes, like
man
children or man babies or something like that. But then the point is that people are like, oh, I was going to buy and read Watchmen, but now I won't bother. And he's like, that's what I wanted all along. That's the theory anyway.
I can respect that.
Yeah, I mean, like we respect everything that Alan Moore does. Like,
yeah, he's magnificent.
he's truly a character. I was gonna say, but that's a bit punny. He's what's the word that's like iconic, but not.
I know what you mean. I mean, he's one of those that I think if he'd been writing in any other medium, he would have been incredibly famous. Like, he's just not famous enough that we've been able to just have him as a joke on the podcast, because it's only other nerds like us know who Alan Moore is, really.
I think, and if it was like, even in the comics realm, if the big two had treated him better, I think they could have been like, hey, do you want to write Batman for like a year? You know, like just like, do you want to, our biggest stuff, do whatever you want, because everything he writes is like revered. Like there's nothing of his. People are like, well, that was shit. Like regardless of what people think of him. So if they had just treated him better and paid him the money that he was owed and everything else, they could have kept him on to do wacky stuff. They could have given him just the like absolute B to Z list of superheroes, but like do whatever you want with them. So we'll protect the main ones, but you do whatever you want with these little ones. And then you get another Swamp Thing, which is like a critically acclaimed run of a superhero.
You just get so much more Alan Moore. Like, you just flood the gates with Alan Moore stuff.
Exactly. And I think if that was the case, he'd be way more famous than he is now. But also you'd have to convince him of it, because I don't think he was that. The reason most of his work
he was that into it.
Well, it's all different stuff, isn't it? Like he only did a bit of superhero stuff occasionally, but right. Enough about Alan Moore for now. We'll pick that up later, obviously. But so the thing with this comic is, as I said, the premise, it gets away from it very quickly. So I think in this non-spoiler part, I think there's a lot to talk about in just what type of comic it is and what kind of things it does without getting into a specific story.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I found most fascinating about it was the narrative device of each issue being set over an order of magnitude time more than the last one.
Yeah.
So the first issue set over 8 seconds, the next one's 8 hours, or is it 8 minutes, 8 hours?
I think so, yeah. It's 8 issues. So I would, counting on my hands like a child, go 8 seconds, 8 minutes, 8 days, 8 weeks, 8 months, 8 years, 8 decades, 8 centuries. So that's, how it goes.
No, so it was 8 minutes.
Yeah,
minutes, hours, days, years, decades, centuries was 7, and then...
I think the last one was centuries. I think.
But what I found fascinating about that is that it gave us this story that grew in scope every single issue.
Yes.
And so by the end of it, we were seeing great sweeping swathes of story. But because they'd done such a good job in establishing all these characters and their motives early on, and they gave us such potent character development the whole way through, that by the 8th issue, when I was seeing a couple hundred years go by at a time for these characters, I was like, yeah, it makes sense that they'd have done that in that time. Like, I don't need to see all that because I know what they did, and that was good enough for me.
Yeah. I think the premise itself, again, it lends itself to showing time increments because of from the first second, the drastic changes to the entire world and the reality of the story. So it's one of the few comics that could be like, hey, we just cover the first 8 seconds in this first issue. And the reason is it's the first 8 seconds off if everyone in the world could make a wish.
It was like bat crap crazy.
It is crazy. And also the first issue does do a bit of time before the wishes. So you've got this start of like, here's some setting up some characters, and then it's like chaos for 8 seconds that immediately happens.
Well, we basically see...
You know what? I might have actually I'm correcting myself, and you might be right. I think the first issue is nothing, and then the second issue is 8 seconds, because at the end of the first issue is when the genies appear.
Yeah.
And then issue 2 is the first 8 seconds. The only reason I remember that, I think, is at the end of the first one, they go, tune in next week to see the first 8 seconds of this story. So I think it must miss out one of the things we've done, like either weeks or days or something.
Set up 8 seconds.
Yep.
8 minutes.
Yep.
8 hours.
Yep.
8 days.
Yep.
8 decades.
I think months might be in there.
Yeah.
I think, because I said weeks and months, I think a month. I could check this, but where's the fun in that?
Yeah. Basically, it's an order of magnitude every issue,
yes,
is what we're getting at.
And
that's a really brilliant narrative device. And so good.
Smartly enough, it's also 8 based on the 8 billion population of the people of the world who are getting genies, which we'll come into it later again. The art is great. It's an art style that I thought if it did just stick to like, here are normal people talking, like a Why the Last Man or something, like it's just people interacting, this art style would be for me enough to be like, this is interesting, and I'm interested by what I'm seeing on the page. As soon as it introduces the genies, the look on them is so good.
And you sent me this a couple months ago. In terms of, you sent me a big list of stuff that you wanted to chat about. And so I remember my first impression seeing the cover, and then going to like last night when I actually started reading it, I was really surprised by the way the genies looked. I was expecting, in my head, Aladdin. Like,
yeah.
I was expecting something with a little bit more of an anthropomorphized form. And so when the genies popped up, I felt a bit let down by them. I was like, they don't look great. But as you get to know them through the issues, and you see that they have these personalities, and they all, you know, once you see the genies with their people, they look a bit like their people, and they take on some of their character attributes. And
like, you can identify who is whose genie.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And there's a big story beat later on where I was like, oh, that's not.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think they did a really great job. The art is stunning. The art is gorgeous.
It really amazes me when you get, as I said, the first issue, everything's normal, and you look at the art and you go, all right, it's good. Like, I like the look of people, and it's interesting, and it draws me in. As soon as it starts doing the fantastical stuff, you go, first of all, you go, oh my God. Like, there's a big 2-page spread of the first, 8 seconds.
Yeah.
Everyone in the world has wishes. They've made them, and it's just immediately looks out, and it's insanity. And it makes me think, how many artists do you see who do just normal, people talking in a bar? What could they achieve if they're given this story or something like this to do amazing stuff? Is it common, or is this particular artist, Ryan Browne, is he just amazing?
Because the thing that caught me about that panel you're talking about, is that there were things that wouldn't normally coexist and things that have quite defined art styles. So there was a lot of mech shit going on. A lot of and because again, the idea was that this was our world, but people had wishes. a lot of the stuff was quite clearly based on fiction.
Yeah.
And so the superheroes looked very superhero-y, but then there was dragons and castles that, you know, you'd expect to be in that kind of more stripped back, early fantasy illustrations in Tolkien's books kind of style. And it was there presented in this, like, beautiful spread playing against off all the, like, very techie, mechanical looking stuff. And it just looked stunning.
Yeah.
Like, I there was quite a few times reading this, and this is like the highest praise I think I can give a comic book, where I stopped to just zoom in on a panel and look at it.
Yeah. I mean, the highest compliment to the art specifically, I would say. And I'd be fascinated to know how much of an influence the writing was on the art. So, like, was the writer, was he like, here's everything you need to put in this spread, have fun with it? Was he like, this is how it specifically needs to look? Did he reference each part? Or was it literally just, here's the world, here's some like vague ideas, like the world hasn't ended.
Draw something.
Yeah, just draw what you want. Like, I think that kind of interaction, and again, we talk about this a lot of time, like how much of a crossover between like panel layout, specific panel layout, like page layout and specific panels. You know, we never really know until you actually talk to them. Or unless you read this, sometimes they put stuff at the end of comics. I love that. I don't think they've done it for this one, which is a shame because this is the one I'd be like, who decided what? Like, you've just got to kind of put it down to like, these two men have made an amazing comic and just hope they work together again in someday. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for both of them on future things.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, like, we keep talking about Brian K. Vaughan today. And it kind of makes sense because this has a similar vibe to Y: The Last Man in some regards. Yeah. He worked with different artists on Y and Saga, didn't he?
Yes.
But you look at the difference in scope of those two books, he would have needed different artists for it.
Yeah, and I think style definitely influences the story. You would, if you, like, I mean, we did Pride of Baghdad last week.
Oh.
That needed to be someone to make who was very good at picturesque wildlife, especially humanizing and putting human emotion on animal faces. That's very specific. And I think same with here, you want someone who could do like a one of these like big page spreads I would put in a frame and hang up on a wall. Like just as a random, no context, like here's a crazy world with all crazy stuff going on in it.
Yeah.
So that's again, I think a very specific try as well. Whereas then something like Y: The Last Man, you want someone who's a bit more of a grounded style, a bit more like human again, I keep using human interaction, but just like human drama. So
it's a bit more, the art style's a bit more gritty and dry. And I remember Y: The Last Man being quite earth toned.
Yes, definitely.
Like lots of greens and browns. Whereas this, did you notice there was a blue thing happening here? Everything was very blue.
Well, the genies had a lot of blue and purple, which is very like cosmic style,
exactly,
like, vibe.
But it fed into the overall art style. Whenever you get an exterior, everything was very blue, everything was very bright, and I think that made it pop, and it made it feel kind of modern and cartoony. But again, the way that they dealt with the human character models was really grounded.
Yeah,
it looked. I'm struggling to articulate it because it just looks great.
Yeah, and I think I mean, pat ourselves on the back. I think we are ones who will typically dive into story a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we are taking this time to be like, this is how good the art is and how much is contributed. Because we sometimes struggle to remember that if we're focusing on the story and stuff. And modern comics, the whole thing with Marvel and DC is a lot of their art is passable with occasional interesting or occasional good bits, like Meet the Skrulls, like mostly kind of standard, but then you had the transitioning thing, and that was like, oh, look, that's an interesting part.
Whereas, and I think this is the thing that I'm noticing from these limited run books, is that maybe it's because they're not worried about having to replicate it over multiple years, and the idea of maybe if you've just got this one artist who does this one thing really well and they go off and get another job, suddenly your series that's running for a few years at a time is left without its artist, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this guy committed to 8 issues, and so it's like, this can be your passion project. This can be you. And so, these limited runs tend to have not better art, because art's so subjective, but
more of a focused style or a focused idea.
Yeah, that's it. That's what. Yeah, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
There's really kind of focused, coherent feel running through all the art and all the panels. And it just makes for such a better reading experience as far as I'm concerned.
And funny you say about the limited series and everything. I thought what was amazing about this, which could feed into maybe other stuff later, is the world building. For a world at Chaos, they really built a world which at any point could be anything. Like, you could go from one place to another and it could be anything that you could possibly imagine because of the wishes. But at the same time, there was also a structure because of the story and because of the characters. It felt like a world to explore.
It did. I agree with you. They also did a really good job of giving the genies more control than the genies had this interesting level of control over the way the wishes worked.
Yes.
And it wasn't all monkey paw stuff.
Well, yeah, and there's an interesting element of that, which they explicitly kind of say.
They explore, don't they?
I think we can get into the rules of the wishing without, there is later revelation stuff, which is the why, but I think we can get into the how, the rules as they are.
So the big rule that I took away from it is that they would big wishes that affected everyone in humanity, unless they were incredibly specifically worded, the genies would take liberty with them and cancel them out against each other.
Yes.
And the genies would also take into account the intent of your wish, and that would define whether or not they monkey pawed you.
Yeah. I think if it was a selfless wish, they would just try and get it as much as you want it. If it was a bit more of a selfish or a ill-intended wish, they might monkey a paw a bit where you go, well, you technically got what you wanted, but also your face has fallen off, or something like that.
And there was none of that explicitly, but there was just people's wishes not functioning the way they wanted. The other thing that I noticed, and this was made explicit right at the end of the last issue, is that if you didn't burn your wish really early on and you spent a bit of time with your genie would get to know you.
Yeah.
And there's this, there's this idea in communication that the length of service with another person informs how well you can communicate with each other. If you make an effort to communicate well. There's this famous story about a writer and his publisher. He wanted to know how his new book was doing, and he'd been working with this publisher his entire life. So he sent him a question mark on a piece of paper. He sent him a letter with a question mark on it. And he got back a letter with an exclamation mark. And they both knew what that meant. So the publisher knew that the question mark was him saying, how has my new novel done? And the exclamation mark was, yeah, we've sold a lot of them. And because they had that depth of experience together, they had this understanding. And so once we get out of that initial, people who, again, they make it quite explicit in the book, people who have only ever wanted one thing burnt their wish really quickly because they knew what they wanted. People who didn't have that spent a bit more time sitting on their wish. And once they did wish, because they'd spent that time with their genie and their genie knew them and understood them, the genie kind of understood what they meant by their words better.
Yes. And their intent as well.
And I thought that was fucking fascinating. I thought that was such a clever mechanic, because often, genies and wishes is a well-worn trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
And often I think the caveat or the technicality that it comes down to is the specific verbiage you use.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of that here, isn't there?
Yeah.
But also the idea that once the genie knows you, they can read further into your words and understand them better. And it's not that the genie's trying to catch you out, it's that they're trying to give you the wish you asked for. And if they don't know you and they have no context, they kind of have to go on the specific verbiage you use. And I just thought that was such an interesting idea and such a great way of handling some of the kind of inherent problems in the genie wish format.
Yeah. And I this is what I meant by the kind of world building, the structure wherever you go. So no matter how fantastical and chaotic the rest of the world is, this wish structure, it affects and it's in every part of the story regardless. And that's what made me feel like I want to explore this world. It shows characters dealing with that in all different ways. And it to a point where I think, credit to the story, I think it's so smartly written, and I imagine it was the way it was written was with a wall covered in post-it notes and string going to each part.
Yeah.
You had to proper build it, every part on a like intangible rule set. Like it's incredible, like to me. I like that the genies, they kind of give very early on the reasoning for why they're being not difficult, but why they're being creative with the wishes. They say explicitly they want as many people to get their wishes as possible. So and I thought going into this blind, I thought one of the things was surely someone's just going to wish for the end of the world. Like there's going to be some psychopath out there who's like, you know what, I want the world to end. And they say like those get cancelled out by the ones who like, I wish for world peace. Like those two cancel each other out. But obviously we don't know for sure that there's like an exact amount of the same number of people making those types of wishes. But they've also taken the liberty of being like, look, any of those wishes, we're just not going to do because, you know.
And again, there's some of that that's expositional, but we see that demonstrated in a really fun way in the 8 minutes issue.
Is that with I think we can go into this because it's not the American government.
Yeah, so we see
that's a good part.
The president has has his chief of staff, I think it is.
Yes, because the president would not waste his own wish.
Absolutely.
But he's got someone under him who's like, I will literally do anything for this country. It's like, all right, we'll use your wish.
And so he wishes that America is the most powerful country.
And they get someone to word it explicitly for the next 100 years and that kind of thing.
And then they call North Korea and ask him to get rid of his nukes. And he's like, why would I do that? Send me Denzel Washington. And that's when we find out that, of course, somebody in every government other than New Zealand.
Except New Zealand.
Other than New Zealand. Come on, you Kiwis. Has wished for the same thing for their country. And it's like, well, not all of them can be supreme. So none of them are because all those wishes cancel each other out.
Exactly.
And again, that could have been, you know, if we were reading the ones... That would have been purely expositional. But it wasn't. It was a story beat. They used the story beat to let us into the world. And, you know, the number one rule of storytelling is show, don't tell.
Yeah. But you do, even in this, you do, like, I kind of struggle with that whenever I imagine writing stuff. I'm like, but how would I show this when surely a character would tell her? You do get tell from the genies. And I think this is a good template and a good example of the balance. So you can show a lot of stuff just by actions. Some stuff does need a character to tell another character.
You have to have some degree of expositional content, but it's
making it seem natural. That's the secret sauce.
And the genies would only give us exposition when a story beat required it, and I thought that was so good.
Yes. And there was very, very well paced at every point. It ebbed and flowed. It never felt stale or too much too quickly or anything. There's what I think, I don't know if you'll agree with this or not. What I interpreted, well, just take that stance from the get-go then.
Fuck you.
or you are the antagonist of the podcast.
How am I?
Because I'm the protagonist. No. I've decided.
I'm the lovable rogue that just doesn't want structure.
All right, I'll give you that. But lovable rogue, is that like the medieval term for like he's just riddled with ADHD?
Do you know what? I love that you've started using my lexicon on that. Like you've adopted my verbiage.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That makes me really happy.
It gives you an idea of feeling. It's like if I talk about like something in a storytelling review kind of sense, I try and stop myself using the word dripping a lot. Like I say, it's dripping with whatever. Existential dread or whatever.
Yeah.
The theme, I think, running through this, this comes into the whole rules. So the reason that they want as many people to have their wishes as possible is what they're trying to do is basically show everyone. They're trying to, the meaning, I think, is desire, human desire, want and desire.
Yeah.
And it examines that across the entire story. So big reason for that, the genies, there is, or from the start, a very kind of like, we would like people to glean this from their wishes and actions. So if someone was like, I want the world to end, it's like, no, we want people to have their wishes because there's a bigger thing at play, which we get into later. But I think that's a good, it gets across intent of a character for why rules are the way they are. Why the world didn't just explode straight away or whatever. But I think the world building, again, you're saying because it's a limited series, I would love this to keep going, not in a continuation of this story, but I would love to see like short runs of some random bystander in this world.
Different points in it as well.
You can make all different characters and do different stuff.
And I suppose this is the thing that we can now get into, which is that because...
Do we do a spoiler warning?
No, I think we're there. I think we're there.
If one little bit, if you're on the fence, read this comic.
Oh, it's so good.
If you don't want it spoiled, stop right now.
No.
Read it, or mute. Leave the podcast playing, so we still get that. The stats.
Ryan, you grubby little creature.
Mute it.
I just
leave
want
it
all
playing.
the listens.
Give me a AdSense.
Give me a listen.
But leave it playing, and then remember where I'll put time. I'll put a time code in for this.
Yeah,
I've started experimenting with time codes.
Noticed.
Yeah,
they're fun.
So yeah, I'll put a time code in, but go out, read it, come back, then join in on the conversation.
Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted,
Which time?
do you know who I'm quoting there?
Everyone.
No, very specifically. So what's his name? First Mayor of London, Ken
Livingston.
Right. Ken Livingston was the head of the Greater London Council.
Yeah.
And then Thatcher dissolved it. And when they brought in the Mayor of London, he was the first Mayor of London. And his first speech as Mayor of London, he just took the podium and said, "Before I was so rudely interrupted." And I thought that was so good. So funny. Ken Livingston, man. Underrated dude.
I just love that only you could go from a fantastical world of wishes being granted to British bureaucracy.
Something that Ken Livingston said in the early noughties.
This one funny thing happened once in the Chamber of Parliament. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, wishes. Genies.
Anyway.
Yes.
Because it zooms out by an order of magnitude every issue, and every issue is the same length, but over a much longer period of time, you're starting to see this happen in waves. And this becomes really explicit.
They refer
the story.
To ages.
Yep. And so the first issue really deals with all the people who burnt their wish straight away. First 8 minutes, straight in, I'm wishing for something stupid. And we see one of the characters do that. There's a band that's turned up to a bar, and it drops. The owner of the bar instantly wishes that nobody in the bar and the bar itself will be affected by any wish that happens outside.
And I've got a lot to get into on that, but keep going.
And then the two of the members of the band are stood outside the bar when this happens. They get their genies, and one of them instantly wishes that the third member of the band loved her.
Yeah.
And that obviously doesn't go very well for her, because there's a wish that's already counteracting it. But it also kind of showed, I think, that human nature that a lot of people have, which is, I have a thing, I need to do it.
Yeah, just a burning desire for something that they can't get in normal life, and now they've just been given this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it's the top-of-mind thing that they've got.
And hers was kind of innocuous, in as much as it didn't hurt a lot of people the way that a lot of people's stupid wishes did. But it was also quite insidious, because it would have taken away her friend's free will.
Yeah, definitely. And that immediately becomes a plot point.
Yes.
And it immediately makes you think less of a character, which, using the framework of the wishes to build a character development, or show a character, not development, but show a character trait that you wouldn't see in normal life, I thought was so smart.
But yeah, so there's those people that make those kind of wishes. And then wrapped up in that first couple of issues was then the people who looked at the situation, realized that the wish they needed to make wasn't for the world they were living in, but this new world. And then we see one of the other protagonists who really cleverly wishes that he had all the tools he needed to keep his family safe. And so he didn't wish for a specific superpower, and what he got was a real sick mech suit, and he was Chinese and couldn't speak English. So suddenly he could speak the native language in the place he was in. And, it showed people who were impulsive, but also then people who were impulsive and thoughtful. And they all burnt their wishes, and the world just kind of starts to crumble, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Really quickly.
And there's I'm fascinated by the logic that went into this story, that there are ages. So that this is something that's been done before, which we'll get into near the end, but there's ages that happen. They refer to as ages, but there's basically periods of time in a world filled with wishes. So the first world is immediate. People have burnt their wishes immediately, and they're doing all sorts of crazy shit. So it's just chaos. Then when that kind of dies down, you then have the
heroes,
the bit more thoughtful people. So people who have wished themselves superpowers, or,
And they call it the Age of Heroes.
Yeah.
And so what you then find are people who are responding to this new world and trying to fix the immediate problem. And that is when we see, I think probably one of my favourite characters is Eddie?
The son?
The son.
Yes, yeah.
So this 11-year-old kid transpires he's got a dead mum. His dad wishes the mum back, and then he wants to protect both of them. And so he finds a really exhaustive list of superpowers, shows his genie on his phone, and suddenly he is a hench superhero. And he spends the next sort of good few issues, so the next sort of 10 to 20 years, farting about being a superhero in the Age of Heroes, trying to undo the mess that everybody's made.
And he's trying to find somewhere safe for his parents, which is why he got such a good superhero wish, is because the genie was like, I can tell you're doing this with the kindest of intentions for your loved ones, so I'm going to give you just the full, amazing superhero, all the powers, like everything you want, like I'm going to do it exactly as you want in your head. Whereas other people, they wished very early and they became like vampires or villains with like chainsaw fingers or, you know, just random stuff like that. And it was like, you wish too quickly, you're very basic. Whereas the child is like, you are invulnerable. You're basically immortal because you're a superhero.
Yeah, he basically got one mech arm Superman. Yes. He?
And the reason that the reason that his intent is so important is because he's trying to save a bunch of people. And in the time that he's trying to save people, the inevitability, as we kind of see from the genie's perspective, is at some point this chaos gets too much and someone uses their wish to just burn the world. And that kind of gets to a point where I think where they stop cancelling each other out. So it's kind of an apocalypse, but there's still a planet. There's still worlds.
What they say is, once everybody's used their immediate wishes and we've had the Age of Heroes and they've kind of fought off all the monsters, then we get the planners. And the thing with the planners is we meet one of them in particular, and we see a great montage of him coming to be. He's like a downtrodden nerd who was really into like local politics and stuff like that. And he wishes that everyone believed in him.
Well, that's not even necessarily planning. So that's a whole thing that is like the proper villain. And he doesn't even, he's not even that present to be a proper villain, but he feels like it. I don't think he prepped. So there were preppers and there were people who were withholding wishes and stuff and made like safe havens and...
Well, he built a safe haven.
Yeah. And there's like a dad who wishes that his 3 children can't use their wishes without his permission.
That comes into play much later.
Yeah. And so that, like, there's all these people who are doing these other things, and we'll get into that guy, Idea Man, a bit later. I have so much to say about so many different aspects of this, like, and I'm trying to like keep like hold of things as we kind of go. One area of the logic that I thought was great, and again with the world building as well, was the idea of, did I call them remnants?
Remnants.
I think that's the word. But essentially, it's people who were wished back from the dead. So we get that explicitly with Ed's mum.
But, well, it's interesting because Ed's mum is brought back, June.
Yeah.
And we just kind of go, oh, she's brought back from the dead. That's cool. And then we meet proper remnants. So they were people who weren't specifically wished back, but they were wished back as part of a wish. And it was Hemingway was one of them.
Yeah.
And Hemingway turns up to the bar they're all holed up in and is just Hemingway. Obnoxious, angry, drunk old man. And it's fucking magnificent. It's so good.
But so that gets built into the world so well, where there's a lot of people who are brought back from the dead, and it's that, and the rules specifically of the person who wished them back, as long as they're alive, the remnant's alive. But if the person who wished them dies, then the remnant dies because that they have fulfilled the wish of being around the person who brought them back. And that comes into play so much as well, that it's, again, just a fascinating bit of the world. I keep using the word world, and I don't know if it's going to get too much or it's going to sound like too much, but I really, like, my biggest takeaway from this whole thing was I was in love with the world of this story, and how it built it from a small corner of nothing to influencing the entire globe. And it was a world that I was sad to finish when I finished the comic, and like I said earlier, I want to see other aspects of it. But this is just one little thing. It feels like a Game of Thrones thing. It's like, there's a bit of magic here, and there's these specific rules for it. It's like, in this world, there are remnants, and these are the rules for them.
I felt similarly finishing this to the way I felt finishing that Supergirl comic we talked about.
Which was about 8 issues as well.
Yeah, because that had quite a specific world, and it was an epic journey through that world, which I kind of felt like we got.
Oh, in spades, yeah.
Yeah, they managed to fit an epic journey into 8 issues without really giving us a lot of details about anybody's big journey.
I think the increasing time periods definitely helped. It started off very personalized, and once you kind of knew the characters and knew the goals and everything, it could speed up and give you the big moments after.
Sweeping.
Yes,
and I think that's really, I suppose, if obviously I'm trying to describe this, and so I'm going to compare and contrast with other bits of literature sometimes.
That's why you're here for.
Yeah. And so it kind of, I got the same feeling from it that I get from like the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yep.
Where there's this really intense personal story happening, but because it's so big, it's also really sweeping.
And the fact that it starts at the Shire and ends at the big battle for the world.
Yeah, and it's like, not many stories can do both that well. You either get a huge sweeping story or you get a really gritty personal story with a high level of detail. Whereas by its nature here, we got a bit of both. And it was really, it never satiated me.
Yeah.
I never felt full from it. Like I could have just kept munching it.
I read some last night and I was going to finish the last few today. And I was so close to like when I should have gone to sleep. I'd been like, I could just finish it now. Like I could just get them through now. And that's the sign of a great story is I wanted to keep reading.
I mean, the fact that you showed up to record and I was an issue off and I was like, just sit down.
Yeah, you'll get it.
Yeah, just sit down. I'm going to get there. Like I'm going to read this.
What were you saying about the art earlier? I was kind of saving this a little bit for once we were in the story a bit more.
Go for it.
So the story, if it wasn't obvious before, the story starts in this bar and it slowly seeps out from there. But because of the first wish of the bar being completely unaffected by anyone's wish, it becomes like a safe haven point, home base kind of thing for like these main characters. But so the art style, you said like how fantastical and how bright the colors were and everything. I found the only time it went back to it was at the bar.
Yeah.
So whenever you went to the bar, it was heavy brown, dark green, grey, kind of like it to give that sense of like normality still exists in this bar.
And it was a grubby little dive bar.
Yep. Like, and then as soon as you get outside, it's whoa, the colours, like it's crazy and bright and weird.
But then we don't find out about this, but it transpires at the end that the big bad caused the reckoning, do they call it?
I think they call it the scarring.
The scouring.
Yes.
Which is basically where they clean everything up, wipe it, and a bunch of people die. And a fun thing happens there that also happens in Why the Last Man, where they sit down and they list all of the famous people that have died.
Yep.
And that happens in the memorial to the men. Yorick sits down with one of the hippie chicks. Hippie chicks. That's awful. Fucking hell.
I mean, she was a hippie chick.
What is it, 1960? Chicks? Come on, that's disgusting.
Hippie chick, I think it's its own, nomenclature.
She's a hippie chick.
Yeah.
Yorick sits down with a hippie chick and they list all the male rock stars that have gone. And they do the same thing here. But they have a fun story for how all these famous people died. And that's really charming. And again, quite grounding.
Well, I say most of them were during the scouring.
But then, it's what they got up to before the scouring.
Yeah. What I really loved as well, and again, this almost felt like it didn't need to be in there, but I'm glad it was, is the function of the genies beyond the wish granting. So
they were like companions, weren't they?
They're companions as well. I don't think they've got as much of their own individual personalities. They kind of reflect the person a bit.
Yeah.
So it's not kind of like, you don't remember anyone's individual genie, but the genies generally, they kind of reminded me a bit of Mr. Meeseeks from Rick and Morty.
Do you know, they're all now the same, you say it,
but they've got a personality they all share. They still are individuals, but they're all kind of the same, but it's still interesting what they collectively are like.
Yeah.
But there seems to be kind of, if you bond with your genie and use them, you almost get extra powers by just talking with the genie.
Because they'll tell you things.
They'll give you information. The only information they won't give you, and I thought this was very clever as well, is they say, the one thing we can't say is we can't tell you why we've appeared and are giving everyone wishes.
Well, you can wish for it.
But you can wish for it. And I think that was a very important note that no one wanted to use their wish for that.
Yeah.
So that was very kind of like, you could find out the answers, but you're not gonna, because you would burn your one token.
Unfortunately, the wishes kind of reminded me of a Pokemon.
The genies, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From Gen 7, Marshadow. Look how similar that looks.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's very, very close. Yeah, I see where you get the resemblance.
Yeah.
the color's a bit polygon as well, isn't it? Or
Porygon.
Yeah.
Do you know what? There's a holographic Porygon right behind you.
I assume any Pokemon card, it's probably in this room with me right now.
Yeah,
I just assume so as much. So, starting with the bar story, a character who I had a lot to say about, and I kind of now have to put it in two halves, is the barman.
Yeah, well, we find out quite early on what the barman's deal is, don't we?
Not properly.
Issue
not
3 or 4.
4, I think. And even then it's just like one kind of statement and then left to explain later. But the reason I want to separate it is I had much different thoughts and opinions on the character before and after that point. So before, he makes the very first wish. He says, the bar is unaffected by wishes. It's a safe haven. And immediately reading that, I go, that's an oddly specific wish to make straight away. Like, it's weird that he had that ready to go.
And the fact that it was called the lamp wick, I was like, he's involved.
Well, we get into that a bit more, and that gives it away a little bit.
Yeah, this is it. A story about genies started in a bar called The Lamp.
Yes,
and I was like,
the Lamp
that guy,
wick.
That guy's got something to do with this.
Yeah.
Like, he knows.
But then things like that can sometimes also just be fun Easter eggs as well.
Yeah.
So, but him saying that so quickly, I thought, that's odd that you've said that. But then the first reveal that he's a prepper, like a doomsday prepper, that immediately made me go, oh, that explains it all. Because this has been on the forefront of his thought. And the way he describes why he's a prepper, and then that verbiage gets used later, but he describes it as, I noted it down as being very specifically vague. So it's like, the people are like, what were you prepping for? And he goes, haven't you read a newspaper? The world's going to shit. Like, people are rubbing up against each other the wrong way. There's a lot of friction between people. Like, something was going to happen eventually. So when you say something like that, you can say that to people of across the political spectrum to the extremes, and they'll all agree. It's only when you get into the who's causing it? That's when it becomes the difference.
It's the who, not the what.
So I thought it was very clever to give him that vague, like, I'm just prepping because everything's shit kind of attitude. But the fact that the bar was the place he was prepping for, that made me go, oh, not only was he prepping for like a safe haven, but he was like, this bar is my last stand. So I'm going to immediately wish for it to be like, protected from everything. So
and there's a little joke about it because they ask for a power block, don't they? And he's like, oh, I've got a little bit of everything downstairs.
I've got a few things, So I had a little bit of like that's a bit convenient how he said that. And then I went, oh, okay, that explains it all. And then we get more things later, which we'll get into then. There's some little points in the panels that I made notes of that I then realized these are unimportant, but they seemed important at the time. One is there's a kid who wishes to become a footballer.
Yeah.
And the way the art does it, he's the footballer, but they try to do like a shrinking thing.
Yeah.
Or like where he's grown taller. But they didn't do that part very well. So this is the one criticism of the art.
It looked like he was on his own shirt, didn't it?
Yes, exactly. So the footballer's just got a random kid on his shirt.
It took me a minute to clock what that was, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah. There's one guy who wished for 2 alien girlfriends.
I know.
Like, I mean, that Area 51 thing, that was a lot of people have that.
And there was a point later where Ed, Sun Man, was killing a bunch of gaiju. And it was like, oh, but he doesn't know if they're gaiju, they're remnants that got wished into existence, or if they're people that wanted to become gaiju.
Yeah, so he didn't know whether to kill them or not.
And I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, again, just every page had like a little like, oh, you've thought about every aspect of this.
Yeah, it does. It feels like something that was in the works for a long time. This wasn't knocked out.
No,
Not
like some other comics we may have read.
Not like another the ones that I know.
There was, I thought was a good little, again, showing thought was there's a panel where a teenage girl had used her wish immediately mid-argument with her parents and wished they'd burn in hell. And they were just like smoking heaps afterwards. And I thought there was definitely a lot of moments for people of that. And that kind of reminded me of like, Infinity War Endgame, where have you seen this? Where the world gets snapped, how many people were in like positions where, because someone else got snapped, that's fucked over someone else.
Like the pilot in a plane that you happen to be on.
Like how many couples were in like mid-argument and like said some awful shit to each other, and then one of them got dusted. And you're like, oh great, I have to live with this now. Like that's that kind of feeling as well. I did think there was an opening to each issue where it shows the world. And I was like, how literally are we taking this world? Because at one point it was a cube.
Yeah.
And at another point it was an ice cream. And I was like, should we be worried about this? Or is this like more of a metaphor? Like things are generally crazy.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring those up is it shows you the human population and the genie population. And I thought was a great device to show you, one, a lot of people are dying over this time, but also how many people are using their wishes. So the fact that you saw a significant amount of genies were still there, like more than half, that told you, oh, not everyone's just used them instantly.
It leveled off, didn't it?
Yep. And it was a good tracker for like the entire series because it would do one every issue.
And then this idea of being wish blocked came into it in a really meaningful way.
I thought that was a great little expert. Do you want to explain that? Because I thought that was a great little thing.
So once you've had your wish for a certain amount of time, when you would think about a wish you could make, you would then also think about all the wishes that you couldn't make, and you'd be aiming for the perfect wish. And so it transpired that actually there was the characters that had had their wishes for a long time that didn't really have a defined idea for how they were going to use them, got a bit wish blocked, and there was a couple situations where, particularly the two musicians, I
can't remember their names, but the two guys in
the band, there were a couple of situations where they hadn't used their wishes and they could have used them to save people, and other characters started thinking they were these awful, callous, selfish people because they weren't wishing other characters out of bad situations. But it turned out that they just were wish blocked. They were too scared that they would wish for something in the moment and it would go wrong and they'd get monkey pawed, or that they were just paralyzed with the potential, the kind of unused potential of their wish. And I must admit, their wish was fucking awesome.
There's a thing that's described in the way where it says in the real world, the prison of choice. I think I might be ad-libbing that, but it's the idea that if a human has too many choices, you can be paralyzed by, again, being scared of picking the wrong choice, and then you just end up not making a choice.
I've had this with money, where I've been saving money and not really knowing what I'm saving it for, and then I'm rendered unable to spend it. And we're not talking about like, the savings in my savings account, like, oh, I'm, saving for a rainy day. It's like you're just accruing a bit of cash for some reason, and you kind of keep saving it, and you sell a few things on Marketplace, and you buy something and you flip it, and you've got this little pot of cash, and you're like, I don't know what to spend it on.
Yeah.
Because that money could be a million different things right now. If I spend it, it becomes one thing, right?
Yeah. And
so I understand that aspect of human nature, and I can see if that couple £100 in 20s was a fucking wish, I would be like, I would be the person who'd be like, I don't know what to wish for. Like, it's infinite.
I was going to save this question for near the end, but I think it's a good one to ask. Where do you think, so two questions, right? Which I think we'll ask each other. One, if you had a wish, what would you wish for? And two, separately, if you had a wish in this world, so what do you think you'd use it immediately? And would you go for the thing, that first answer? Or would you hold on? Do you think you would be the person to hold on to it?
Knowing who I am and my relationship with money, I would hold on to it.
Yeah, same. And I think the reason for that, for me, I know this about myself, is whenever I play a video game and there's like items, I always finish it with like a large amount of what would have been helpful items. Because in my mind, I'm always going, well, what if I need this later? So I'm always like, what if I need it for the next room? And I make the game harder for myself. And I think that's like an allegory in itself. It's like you could have made the game easier for yourself and you would have been fine, but you made it harder for yourself by being indecisive about when to use things.
And I feel like I have that in my own life with resources that I have and stuff like that.
And I think it's better to be that than impulsive.
Yeah, I have 2 sets of guitar strings sat there that could have been on one of my guitars recently, but I'm like, well, no, because they'll go on the right one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. And I think as well that the holding on to wishes definitely becomes like a big plot point for the world as well. Like who has wishes and who doesn't becomes like a thing as you go on.
Particularly as people start hoarding them and collecting them.
Yeah, and I think
it's never made explicit how wishes are transferred.
I think that there is, so the genies can do a lot, right? Beyond granting a wish, they can do a lot for you. And a lot of that also comes into the admin of the wishes. So I think what happens is, and you see I think maybe once or twice, someone can say, someone else can make my wish. So they haven't made a wish, but they've said, the wish that's holding for me, I give blanket
carte blanche.
Yeah, I give complete consent for this other person to use it. So then the genie, getting that, go, well, I might as well now hang around the person who I've been ordered to take the wish from. Yeah. So it's never that it becomes their wish, but they have been gifted it in a sense.
And I think, sincerely, if I just had a wish and it just kind of worked in any random way, I think I would wish at some point. Honestly, in this world, I think I'd take the genie over the wish.
I mean, I would hold onto it for a rainy day kind of mentality.
The thing with the wishes in this universe is that you get one wish. Unless you're very, very clever and very careful, you can't always guarantee that your wish won't be counteracted or cancelled out, or that you won't get monkey pawed. But when you have the genie, you kind of have access to this amazing resource that the genie is. And so the characters that did the best out of the story and survived the longest spent a long time with their genie, learning from their genies. And they would chat with their genies, and, you know, the genies became this like, well, do you know what's going on with this person that I can't reach because, you know, we're in a post-apocalypse? And they're like, oh yeah, they're doing this thing. That's really cool.
And early on, they get used as translators. So between the Chinese characters and the English-speaking characters, they're like, tell them this, and then the genie will just translate because they have all the information.
And so, yeah, there's a power to just having a genie. I suppose we have to get into the later stages now. So there's been the scouring.
I'll tell you who I want to talk about first, and I think you'll agree, is the Idea Man.
Well, right? Yeah, so we really meet him properly post-scouring, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, the Ideas Man, I think, is one of my favourite antagonists of anything. And
yeah,
the reason is not because he's especially like a powerful or insane villain, or that he does much, but I think the explanation for why he is what he is and how he became powerful, I think I love that aspect of his story.
Yeah, so he wishes that people believe in him, and I think that's a really interesting wish. And what's really cool is that June, who's a remnant, sees through him. And so everybody else is kind of drinking his Kool-Aid, including her husband and her son. And for years, literally, we're in the first 8 years. We're in the 8 years issue when this happens. She sat with her husband being like, you realise he's exploiting our son, right? Like, you realise he's turning our son into a cold-blooded fucking killer. And the kid's about 15, 16 years old at this point, and he is just like brutalising people from the other factions, the other havens.
Yeah, and what especially I liked was his backstory, because you got into a bit earlier, but it's how he was a kind of downtrodden guy who no one really gave a shit about, and that's why he made that wish immediately.
It was a good wish, though.
It was, but I think it was kind of lucky on him that he was the person who wanted this kind of thing. But so I think it really portrayed that trope of a villain who is downtrodden in their life, and normally those kind of characters become very virtuous because they're like, oh, I've been down in the dump, so I know what it's like, and I want to help people. There's a kind of more modern version of a villain who, not even more. Actually, no, I'm going to take that back, because there's a lot of villains like in old literature who are like scarred and disfigured, and who are evil anyway. So it's not a new thing. But I like the representation of like, just because someone is downtrodden doesn't make them automatically good. Like it's not sweeping, and it makes the ones who then are downtrodden in their life and good better, because they held on to that virtue despite their circumstances. But someone like him was always just like, not even that bad a life, just people didn't really give a shit about him or what he had to say. So when he wished people believe in him, I felt like that was more insidious than if he was like an evil character who was like, I wish I could make people believe whatever I say, or like that people would believe my lies or something like that. So what you'd have then is you'd have people being like, he says something and they go just magically like, oh, I believe you. This became a lot more insidious, because if he was exposed or anyone kind of pointing out his lies, like the remnants do, the people go, all right, yeah, I do see he's lying, but I believe in him, that he has our best intentions, and I still feel like we should support him. And that kind of vagueness made him more successful at what he did. And I think I don't know if we see it or not, but I think he generally said to people like, hey, you should give me your wish. And they went, well, I believe in you, so there you go. And he had just an army of wishes. It also made a lot more insidious the lawyers who collected wishes as well.
Oh, well, this is the thing, and I think this is possibly a comment on AI.
You always bring it back to AI.
Well, one of the things that's going to become really potent in the AI generation is people who are good at writing prompts for AI, right? The lawyers became really important because they're very good at wording things and closing up loopholes.
Yeah, for wish granting specifically.
Exactly, yeah. And so the lawyers became even more powerful. And there was a negotiation between the ideas man and a bunch of lawyers he'd been using to draft his wishes. And they were saying, well, this is why from the start we've only taken payment in wishes.
Yeah.
Like, if you want us to draft a wish for you, you have to have quite a few of them already because we want them.
And they had those skills to immediately be like, we know exactly what to do with this scenario, and became very powerful.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of the bank in Game of Thrones?
The Iron Bank.
The Iron Bank. So they're not particularly powerful in the sense that, so they have their own kind of haven, but they says the population are like 25 people. So it's not like a haven everyone goes to.
Well, it's the Iron Bank of Bravos. So they're in Bravos, which is a very big and powerful city-state.
Right.
But the thing with the Iron Bank is they don't hold power directly.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of influence over really powerful people. So, for instance, one of the places that Tywin Lannister starts to come a bit unstuck is that actually the Lannister gold mine has run dry during the events of Song of Ice and Fire. And he's really reliant on the Iron Bank. And so once he dies, the Iron Bank come back to renegotiate with Cersei. And she's like, so same deal? And they're like, no, you owe us a lot of money and you are not Tywin Lannister.
Yeah.
And then it's that, isn't it? It's they don't have direct power, but they have a lot of influence, which in itself can look like power.
Yeah. And I think, again, like, they didn't have like a very powerful haven, because it gets to the point after the scouring that these safe havens become warring factions almost.
It starts to feel a little bit Walking Dead.
Yeah, I see that. Across a wasteland, these like isolated areas of safety, yeah. And the reason I compared the lawyers to the Iron Bank is that their haven wasn't particularly powerful, but as soon as you start to threaten to wrong them, they're like, by the way, we have about 100 wishes on ready to go. So
we have a lot of wishes, yeah.
Yeah. There's also a really smart bit where the idea man, his genies, or the genies that kind of work for him, just don't like him. So at one point when one like gets automatically grinded, it's like,
they flip him off.
Yeah, like, fuck you, I'm off. But what's really smart is he sets up some wishes to automatically go off in the event of something. So specifically, because a genie disappeared, he knew that was almost like a detection
Somebody's
system.
under attack. We're under attack.
They're attacking us. This wish has just automatically defended us. I now need to proactively. So he was very, I guess in that way, he was definitely the prepper. The reason I didn't want to give him the prepper thing before was that he didn't prep with his original wish, but he became a prepper once he amassed wishes.
Yeah.
And he probably got advice from someone. It was like someone who believed in him was like, hey, I've got an idea. Maybe you should do this. He was like, good idea. It's like, that was my idea now. But yeah, great villain. I think just like a good plot point again of like desire, like the undercurrent theme, and how he wanted to just be the most important person. But
again, because his desires weren't great, he had to be really specific. And they even said, there was a plot point where they said, oh, well, you know, these big wishes are going off. You said this doesn't happen. And they're like, no, some people get really good at wording their wishes.
Yeah.
Like when he was doing the wish to make the replenishment, to rebuild the earth after he'd scoured it clean. And he said he was talking for 30 minutes straight. And he was like, if I put a pause in here where it shouldn't be, I'm going to get monkey pawed. So he knew that he was going, and he'd pulled a genie up and been like, right, you're going to take this down. And 30 minutes later, he's still reading this lawyer-written verbiage to get this wish off.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I mean, we talk about this as a fantasy setting. If this happened, there would be people doing that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's, again, why I keep coming back to the term world building and loving the world, is that these logical conclusions have created the world that we are seeing now and the people who occupy. And also the genies being like, oh, we're at this age now because people would naturally make these kind of wishes. I think there's a lot that we genuinely don't have time to get into. And I think that's not only a credit to the comic, But I also think the benefit is, if anyone is listening to this, if they've still made it to this part and thought, I still can't quite be asked to pick up, I'll hear what they say about it. I think you could finish this episode and everything we say, and you'll still get a lot of stuff that we don't even get a chance to touch on.
Yeah.
In just 8 issues. Like, that's incredibly economic for storytelling.
I mean, 8 issues is what, about 100 pages?
I'd say about, not including the riff-raff, so about 20 pages an issue, give or take.
Yeah.
So about 160 pages.
160 pages is a novella. It's a short novel.
I think the visual storytelling does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those stories that needed to be a comic.
Yeah, this would be a huge novel. This would be a 800 or 900 page Goliath of a novel.
Yep. And I think it's also going to be one of those, like, what they refer to a lot of unfilmable stories. So, like, you couldn't make it live action. And I think you could technically, but I think with all the fantastical stuff, it would be one of the most, just on CGI alone, one of the most expensive shows ever made. For it to not look janky and shitty in the CGI. Do you know what I mean? So
it would need to be an animated film.
An animated film of this, I think, would be amazing. If you got the right art style and put the effort in. If
you found a bunch of former Electric Light and Magic, you know what I mean, don't you?
Electric Works or something, or Light Works? I might be thinking of something else.
Electric Light and Magic, I'm thinking of the former Lucasfilm guys. You got a bunch of that kind of stable of animators, like Pixar-y, Electric Light and Magic animators on this. Basically, you scooped up a bunch of people who didn't work at Pixar or for Lucasfilms anymore and got them to do it. It could be one of the most... it would be one of the biggest films in the year it came out.
Yeah, I think this would be like a cinema release style film, and not only looking amazing, but the story would absolutely like get people in as well.
I would be super surprised if a studio didn't scoop up and option this.
Yeah, the story, how good the story is in the world building, and I've only just thought of this. It kind of reminds me a bit of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and not only it's kicking me. I'm kicking myself that I'm only just thinking of like the Wish connection now, but also that does a very big story building with magic thing, where it starts off quite quaint and then it builds and builds and builds, and you have these characters related to the magic and their use of it being character development. I think if a film like, Puss in Boots: Last Wish, financially did not do well, critically acclaimed.
Did it not do well? Because
there was 2 Puss in Boots films before then that weren't very good. So when a third one came out, people were like, "Why would I go and see this extra one?" And then it just turned out to be amazing. I think it got a bit of a bump from word of mouth, but still, I think a lot of people were like, "We'll wait." But also, kids' films do pretty well anyway, because a lot of people just they take their kids to films without worrying anyway. So yeah, there's only a couple of areas I think we should get into now before the end, and that's
the ending.
Well, I was
not even talked about the ending.
I don't know. So here's the thing: I don't know if we should or not.
I don't know that we need to.
That's what
the
I mean.
ending's great, and the ending's really interesting and really cool. And that last issue is probably my favorite issue of the 8-issue run. But yeah, I think we could actually do this as a kind of an episode where we don't spoil the ending, because we've touched on all the wider themes anyway.
Yes, exactly. And
there's not been a funny episode, Ryan, because we've just gotten deep into it. Like,
I tell you what, the ones where you rip into something are definitely more entertaining. I think this is more like informative. Like, look how good this was all amazing. Yeah. One of the reveals that I think did impact me midway was the reveal that the barman is actually a genie.
Yeah, so he was the genie who granted the last wish in the last go-round, and that person gets to be an immortal human on Earth who can't die, who lives until the next round of wishes are all done, basically. And he was a cool character, man. He was great.
Yeah, and I think when he first came out with that really concise wish at the start, I thought, he's something to do with this. But then when the prepper stuff was revealed, I went, that explains it all. So that threw me off the scent.
The whole way through, I was like waiting.
See, I got it at the start, and then I kind of went off it with the prepper stuff. And to be fair, I think I liked the prepper stuff a bit more. I liked a human having that. A prepper would be like that, and I liked that aspect. So when he was revealed to be a genie, I was like, oh, okay, we're back on this then.
I mean, he kind of was a prepper that had been prepping for 8 centuries.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a moment where he said something, and I just thought it was so beautiful that I'm going to repeat it. So he talked about the last issue really is just a rundown of how he spent his 8 centuries. And he talked about all the things he did. And one of the things he did was just learn a bunch of skills. And he said, I'm quoting verbatim because I've screenshotted it. But I'll tell you this, the acquisition of skills is one of the most satisfying parts of being alive. It's a wish granted in slow motion. That is a sexy line.
That is so beautiful that we cannot banter off it at all, which is the highest acclaim you can give a piece of writing.
It made me feel some shit, you know? Like that last issue where he talks about the way he spent his 8 centuries and the lessons he learned was so impactful for me. It was really impactful. I found it really, really impactful. Just, you know, this sense that he'd lived a long time and these are the lessons he learned.
Yeah.
And I agree with all of them. And I think, you know, I feel like that's one of those things that unless this was written by somebody who was much older, they must have sat down with somebody who was much older and been like, what is the benefit of your having been around the sun more times than me?
Yeah, of course.
You know?
His reveal also gets into the cause of everything, which I don't...
Yeah.
I think by ending, we're talking about how everything resolves. But towards the end, the reveal is why the genies appeared in the first place. And I thought that was quite clever. So basically, they are a kind of cosmic guardrail for a conscious species getting too...
proliferating itself too much.
Too widespread, too big, too demanding, too greedy.
Yeah.
So at the 8 billion population number, that's like, that triggers the genies. And the point is, it resets the world, and it is also meant to show everyone, or at least the survivors, and ideally the last person, but that's later, but it gets into the cost of desire, or cost of satisfying desire.
Because what you find, and the whole point of this, from the genie's perspective, is that there's only actually one wish that ultimately matters, and it's the last one.
Yes.
And the last wish is beautiful.
Yeah, and that logically makes sense. Like, the last wish is going to be the be-all, end-all.
I think the thing that's interesting about the later issues for me, getting an insight into how it all works is nice and it's interesting, and I thought it was cool. But it's the same thing that I really like about a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction. And it's not the bit where it shows you what happens directly after. And it's not the bit where you see how people have learned to survive. It's when you watch the generation that were born into or grew up in the apocalypse. I always find their stories more interesting. So in The Walking Dead, when we see the settlement and Carl and the knights and all that stuff, that to me is more interesting than watching the initial fallout.
Yeah.
And then again, like watching fucking Zombieland.
Yeah.
Zombieland 2 was really cool because we got to see the young people make their little hippie settlement. And we got to see some of that with the haven where the parents had control over their kids' wishes.
Yep.
And just watching the way that changed the relationship between the parents and the children was really interesting.
And
we've barely touched on it.
The rebelliousness, inherent rebelliousness, and parents trying to control their children, but with the best intentions for their safety and well-being. So yeah, I think there's so many, this whole wish concept gets used for so many aspects of just human behavior and human existence. Again, why I think we both are saying this is probably going to be one of our favorites, if not the favorite of the year or that we ever do.
It is my favorite thing that I have read for the podcast.
Yes.
I loved Mouse for a long time, and obviously a lot of the Alan Moore stuff that we've talked about. But this is my favorite. I think this is my favorite thing that I read for the express purpose of talking to you about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's so there's this beautiful level of depth that you don't get bogged down in. Like these revelations aren't played too heavily. And so you're finding stuff out about the wider story, but you're finding out about it in situ, and it's paced really well.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to say without giving away or spoiling it is the character development of one of the characters, Daisy. Her character development, and again, at this point, if you're listening to this, if you haven't read it, if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't read it, you just go should read it.
We talked about Daisy right at the start.
Yeah.
Daisy's the woman who burnt her wish trying to make somebody love her.
Yes, her development and change, kind of acting a bit like a person without any powers in a superpowered world.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool because that she felt like the normal person's view because she was just a person without a wish almost.
And Daisy also got 2 wishes.
Yes, and that's I think that a really good way of coming around. I think we'll leave as to how she does it, but I thought that was a great coming back round circular kind of thing.
Strongest character throughout. Had an amazing arc. Their story was my favorite one of the threads.
Yes.
The band doing their thing, just wanting to make music, man. Like for the rock and roll, you know?
Yeah. I think, overall, just an amazing comic, and also a great bonus as I was reading it was I thought, James is going to love this, and then it got to a point when, and secretly, it's actually a superhero comic. It got to where I was like, this is basically a superhero comic. I was like, felt like I Trojan horsed you into if I had known beforehand, it would have been like, he doesn't know yet, but it's about to get superheroed. I just imagine you being like, this is awesome, and then going, oh, for fuck's sake.
There was a moment where I was like, when that band of heroes turned up and it all got a bit Avengers-y for like 2 panels, I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, is this what the rest of it's... But I knew that wasn't going to be the whole comic. I knew that was just an aspect of it that we were going to see for a little bit and not again.
Yeah, that was, if it had just turned... Imagine if it had just turned into a generic superhero story from that point on.
I would have thrown up on you.
Because of the amazing dip in quality from like the start to like...
yeah. I would have been so hurt.
It just doesn't go back to any of the other great characters. It's just like, no, superhero story now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have been pissed.
Here's a villain. He has the same powers as the hero. Like, how will they get on? Probably not well.
So, for the regular listener of the Comic Literate podcast, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of superhero comics.
It gets brought up regularly.
Next week, we are talking about The Flash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this episode in a really cheery way, because the next time you hear me, dear listener, I'm going to be miserable.
And for anyone who cares, we are specifically going to be doing the Flashpoint story.
Which is the same as all the other fucking...
Well, it's a bit different, but we'll get into it. I'm sure we'll dig deep into it for
thank you for listening.
A good 2 hours.
Ugh. I'm Ryan.
First 3-hour podcast.
So thanks for listening. If you want to send us hate mail, or you want to tell me why superhero comics are wonderful, you can reach us at comicliterate@gmail.com. We are on YouTube as Comic Literate. Go look at the shorts; they're fun.
TikTok as well, but
TikTok.
I get around to it when I get around to it. It's mainly YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, but Ryan is going to do stuff on YouTube one day. I'll mention it again when he actually does it. Thank you so much for listening.
Reviews.
Pardon?
Reviews.
Review us. There's places if you just review us whatever app you have open,
preferably as positively as possible. You can call us names, you could say whatever you want as long as
5 stars.
5 stars, and you can call us assholes or whatever.
If you just want to do a review and you want me to see that you've just done a review for the sake of doing it for us, make it a 5-star review and then make the text 5-star cunts.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.